My case is a little special. It's true that I am in the Jewish studies department, but I was in fact raised Jewish by a Jewish father, and I was raised Christian by a Christian mother. So I'm a kind of a hybrid. I don't know what category I belong to in that context, but for sure I am on the spectrum of Jewishness, and I have, I have always cultivated strong connection to my faith, to Jewish scripture, to Jewish philosophy, because that has become my specialty, and of course to the Jewish community, including Israel. I used to visit Israel as a kid to see my grandparents. So I have always had, emotional tie to that country. And of course, when the war hit, it did hit me also personally. I felt the hit. Very young in my college years, I was, doing philosophy, but I very quickly became interested in Jewish philosophy. So I ended up specializing in a post-Holocaust philosophy. My specialty was, or the person I worked on was Emmanuel Levinas, who is um, not a survivor of the Holocaust, but his whole family was exterminated in the Holocaust, and he emerged from that trauma with, a philosophy centered on the other. For him, one of the reasons that the Holocaust took place is that the Western consciousness did not have a sense or an awareness or a sensitivity to the other. And so he has spent, most of his writings are centered around this issue of the importance of welcoming the other, the importance of being sensitive to the other. So that's kind of what I've been working on. And that was the theme of my first book, right? Emmanuel Levinas, A Philosophy of Exile. And yeah, so that would be my my academic background. From Levinas, you saw very correctly that my research has now moved into the Hebrew Bible, the wisdom text of the Hebrew Bible. And the Song of Songs is actually part of a very interesting family of texts in the Hebrew scriptures. These are called the wisdom books. And these are the books which actually have a very, in my view, in my analysis, have a very strong matriarchal flavor. We tend to think of the Hebrew Bible as a patriarchal text, and it's true that most of the writers and the protagonists are male. It's true the culture is patriarchal, but in the Hebrew Bible, there's also a very strong matriarchal sub undercurrent. There are very strong female protagonists. There are books named, by women, which have women's names. And so a lot of these wisdom books, which are part of the Hebrew Bible, actually feature strong female protagonists, have a strong feminine voice. And so for me, it was interesting to explore as a woman and as a 21st century woman to find that there is in the Hebrew Bible echoes of my experience as a woman. It's interesting that these books also, in addition to having a strong feminine voice, also are much more open to those who cannot conform to religion. So I call these books kind of the gospel of the black sheep. These are the books written for those people who can't walk the line, who can't follow the rules, who can't, do what they're told. And so they often feature protagonists and writers that are themselves very transgressive, who have transgressed. And in our context, the woman of the Song of Songs is a woman who broke all the rules. All the rules of courtship are broken in this book. And yet she finds true love, right? So essentially for me, this book was a book on grace, on the fact that even if you take a wrong turn, even if you, mess up, even if you break all the rules, you can still find your path back to true love. So this book resonates particularly with me as a 21st century woman, because I personally live in a world where we are kind of in a post-religious world, post-marriage world. And as women who choose not to follow the traditional path of religion, we don't have much guidance, right? And I believe this particular book offers guidance to those women who can't fit in the tradition or in the mold, in the traditional mold, right? That is often imposed on women. So that book for me was really meaningful because I think it offers guidance, a path, wisdom when it comes to relationships to the modern woman who can't fit into the traditional role. I guess that's how I would put it. It's interesting because this book, the wisdom books in the Hebrew Bible, are not typically written for Jews or for believers. They're actually, the target audience are what are called the nations. So this particular book, which features a non-Jewish character in my view, a woman who is probably of African descent, she's described as dark-skinned. So actually this book is targeting more of the, more of a much more universal audience. It's targeting, I usually tell my students, this book was written for us, right, who are not in the Jewish context. Of course, Jews can get wisdom from it, and I think Jewish women, Israeli women, especially women who are kind of moving away from the traditional roles of religion, who are moving away from orthodoxy, and who have really no guidance, right, can find guidance in this book, because this book is really written for those women who don't fit in orthodoxy, who don't fit in traditional roles. And we have many, many Jewish women and Israeli women who are in that predicament. And we are, I think, in a crisis when it comes to relationships, right? When we don't follow the traditional roles. It's easy. If you follow the traditional roles, it's kind of laid out, right? It's scripted, and it works I think it works very well. But then you have the other path where there's really no guidance, and it's a mess. It's chaos, right? And so now what, right? And so the biblical writers knew, right, that there are people who walk the line and people who can't walk the line, and they have in a way added these books in the biblical canon for those people. So I find this book to be so precious when it comes to women who don't fit within the orthodoxy, who don't fit within traditional roles. What guidance can they get? And this is a lot of Jewish and Israeli women, and women in general. What guidance can they get? Right there in that book, you have a path, you have wisdom for that kind of woman. So Emmanuel Levinas, I consider him a philosopher of exile. He himself went through exile, right? He was exiled, and he comes from a people of exile. And what I try to do in the book is to show that for Emmanuel Levinas, there is a way to see exile as a positive experience, not as a negative experience. And I think this is meaningful for anyone who has undergone exile, right? This is showing that exile is not so much a curse. It can be a blessing. It can be life-giving. It can be redemptive. It can awaken consciousness. It can make you a better person, basically, right? There is the main idea in the book, which is actually a biblical idea, is that exile opens you up to the other. Exile makes you more sensitive to the plight of the marginalized, of the oppressed, because you yourself have been oppressed, right? So that's kind of what I show in the book. I show that exile can have, you can look at exile in a positive lens, right? So the book, however, it has deeper roots, right? In the Jewish experience, right? This is why I fixated on that concept. Exile actually has been part of the Jewish experience since biblical times, right? In the Bible, you have from the very early characters of biblical times. If you read the story of just Adam and Eve, right? If you read the story of Cain and Abel, the story of the Tower of Babel, these are all exiles, right? Adam and Eve are expulsed from the garden. Cain is exiled. The people of the Tower of Babel are exiled. Abraham is exiled. So and then you have the collective exiles to Egypt, from Egypt back into the promised land. You have the exile then later to Babylon, and then the greater exile all over the world. So exile has marked the Jewish psyche. And in a way, I think this brings us close to all the communities who have experienced exile, right? Including, this should bring us close, right, to our Palestinian brothers and sisters who are experiencing now this trauma, right, as we have, right? So that's the first thing. It brings us closer to the plight of the oppressed. But especially interesting is the way the Hebrew Bible interprets the experience of exile. There's a beautiful quote that is given in the text where it says, in essence, because you were strangers in Egypt, right? Because you were exiled in Egypt, now you will love the stranger within your borders. So in the context of receiving the promised land, the Hebrews are commanded, because you were strangers, because you were in exile, you will now love the exiled, right? And this is, I think we need to remember this. This is part of what it means to be Jewish, actually. Right? I think there's something here about the Jewish consciousness, which sometimes is forgotten in all the political, struggles, is that Jewish consciousness is not only marked by exile and trauma, it's marked by the welcoming of the other, the love of the stranger, which emerges from this trauma, right? Because I have suffered, because I have been oppressed, I'm sensitive to your suffering and to your oppression, right? So I would argue personally is that what makes a Jew Jewish, right, is not so much ethnicity or blood or, the religion. It's this awareness. It's this sensibility to the other. That is what marks the Jewish psyche. I mean, this sensibility to the other is so powerful in the Jewish psyche that you have even texts, right? I mean, well, basically, it's the idea that we need to protect humanity at all costs, right? Even to the point that if I am threatened, it is better to be killed than to kill. And this is such a strong passage, which of course is very contested, right? Right now in the context of Israel, this is a Jewish idea which has been criticized um, by in the 21st century after the Holocaust. But I want to quote it to you because it's a beautiful passage from the Talmud in Treatise Sanhedrin 74a. It says this: if a man is commanded transgress and suffer not death. So in general, in Jewish tradition, if you're going to die, it's better to transgress than to die. So for example, you're in a desert, you have nothing to eat, and there's a pig coming towards you. It's better to eat the pig than to die, right? So in general, we transgress for the sake of life. But they said, except he may transgress and not suffer death, except three things where it's better to suffer death than to transgress. Number one, idolatry. Number two, incest. And number three, murder. So it's better to die than to commit adultery. It's better, or incest. It's better to die than to fall into idolatry, and it's better to die than to commit murder. So this is this is very deep in the Jewish ethical code and in the Jewish ethical consciousness, right? And this is why any war in that context, at least in the Jewish mindset, is problematic, right? Any killing is problematic. And maybe that's why a lot of American Jews, you can see, are protesting against the war, right? It's coming from there. It's like, we're Jewish, we're not supposed to kill. It's better to be killed than to kill. They are aware of this, right? So it's a problem. Of course, living in Israel is a different situation because there it's more of a matter of survival. It's not, here we are in America, we are thinking, right? But if you're there, it's a different story. So American Jews tend to not want to judge, but it's a problem still. It's a problem, right? It remains a problem. So just to go now to tie into your fourth question, which is connecting all this to the war in Gaza, I think this is with the stance of American Jews. Of course, we stand with Israel and we understand from a distance, we're not there, so we have not experienced that trauma. We are not experiencing the immediate threat. So we choose not to criticize, or we tone down our criticisms for now because of what has happened, because of the massacre of October 7 and so forth. So we have taken a step back in our criticism collectively. But I think we remain very sensitive to this notion of murder. And I think a lot of us are arguing that while it's essential to protect Jewish bodies, we have to make sure we also protect the Jewish soul, right? So it's very important. Yes, we have to fight, we have to defend ourselves and so forth, but we have to do it in a way that we won't lose our soul. And we are keenly aware that murder or any type of killing in a way is destroying a part of ourselves, right? And I think the Israeli army does have a policy, right, of, at least in theory, to murder as little civilians as possible, right? There is really, I mean, an effort, let's say. Of course, we can always argue the effort could be bigger, but there is a genuine effort, I think, on the part of the Israeli Defense Forces to spare civilians, to spare ordinary human beings because of this ethics, right? That it is better to be killed than to kill. So, but we have to be careful, right? And this is where American Jews maybe are kind of holding that idea, keeping it alive, that yes, sometimes it's necessary to kill, but let us be careful not to normalize the killing, not to justify the killing. The killing must remain problematic, right? Any type of killing must remain problematic. We can't be like, yeah, we have to do this, we have no choice, and this is, it has to remain a problem, right? And so, by the way, this is why I appreciate on campus, especially Queens College, we have students demonstrating against the war. And I'm happy for that. I think it's important to demonstrate against civilian deaths. I think it's very important to stand up for civilians that are being killed. We cannot normalize this. No matter how much I understand that, we need to defend ourselves as, Israel needs to defend itself, war is inevitable. It still has to remain problematic. We cannot fall into, well, we have to do it, it's justified. No, it's not. It's never. Killing a human being is never justified, in my view, right? So that's why I appreciate the demonstration. Sometimes I wish that, as they fight against injustice, they would, it's important not to become oneself unjust. So some of the slogans, perhaps I would tone down, but in order to maybe rally even more people to the cause. I know I would stand with those demonstrations against the killing of civilians. I would want to be there, except for some of the slogans, right? So that's another conversation. But I think it's very important to have these people on campus continuing to maintain that it is problematic that civilians are being killed. It has to remain problematic. That is profoundly in line with the Jewish ethos, right? Okay, I'm talking a lot. So that, I think, is the perception of American Jews, right? We are, in a way, we understand the need for self-defense. We see the efforts that Israel is making not to kill civilians. We appreciate, we support, but at the same time, we hold, we want to keep holding the notion that, be careful, killing should never be normalized. It's never, it's always problematic. We have, and that's what we are doing, right, from our distance. I think a lot of Jews are distressed, including on campus, are distressed with the sheer amount of civilian deaths, right? We are distressed. After I stopped watching the news because I had to do that, I would sit in front of, and I watch Al Jazeera. That's actually really like that channel. Of course, it's kind of biased, but I enjoy Al Jazeera a lot. It has a lot of amazing documentaries. I think it's a very valuable channel if you want to, find out about the world, what's going on in the world beyond just American or European perspective. And they have a lot of positive documentaries, but I was watching them. So I'm watching the coverage, which isn't great on Al Jazeera. But I would sit there and cry every day. I would watch this and see, not cry for the October. Of course, I had my moment there, but I would see the faces of the Palestinians that were filmed, right, as they're running around and it's chaos and they're carrying children and everybody's distraught, and I would just sit there and weep. And at some point I had to stop watching because it was ruining my semester. I couldn't function. But I personally, I am not, I don't judge what Israel is doing. This is their prerogative. They're the ones who were attacked, not me. But I still feel so hurt by so many people dying. And I would want to fight and demonstrate for another way to do this. And I think it's all these civilian deaths are problematic. They cannot be justified or normalized. And that is why I would stand at these protests. I would do it. The issue is that the protest has become, I think, all over the country, has become like like Israel versus Palestine issue, right? And it has become a lot of the slogans, right, for me are not acceptable because there are two slogans, perhaps, right, that hit me the most, right? The first one is the one against Zionism. I forget, there's several versions of it, but usually it's the idea that, we need to get rid of rid of Israel, right? This is problematic, right? I understand criticizing the Israeli government, but encouraging or speaking in the sense that, oh, let's get rid of Israel and replace it. I guess the best slogan would be from the river to the sea. That one, of course, has many meanings, but one of the meanings that Jews understand is that, oh, from the river to the sea, no more Israelis, no more Jews, right? This can be now just a purely Palestinian state. That's how they understand it, or that's how I also understand it. Maybe it has a different meaning in the context of the demonstration. So a lot of these slogans, which are anti-Israel, for example, which in a way seem to encourage the annihilation of the state of Israel, for us is not possible, right? Because it's for us, it sounds like genocide. Let's annihilate the state of Israel. What does that mean pragmatically? Right? So for us, it sounds like let's wipe them out, right? So obviously we can't stand by that. And so it's blocking a lot of students. I think, the ideal for me would be we all stand together for life, right? I think we can all agree that we don't want these people to die, right? So I would love it if the demonstrations would be maybe more targeted on, what is happening, on maybe what the government is doing, the Israeli government, which a lot of us don't stand by, right? A lot of us do not stand with that government. So I think it would be wonderful if the demonstrations would be perhaps more about, would be more targeted, more critical of the government, not so much, speaking of wiping out the Jewish state, but maybe the criticizing the Israeli government or policy, right? So, and I would then feel more comfortable to participate in those demonstrations. I think as a country, we need to be very careful of funding, of supporting a war which can become a criminal. And we have to speak up. So what I've been thinking of going and talking to some of the demonstrators and talking about the language that is used, because such a language in a way, um, it's blocking. It's in a way it's bringing in more hatred rather than reducing hatred. It's inciting hatred. And so ideally for me would be, let's focus on what the government is doing, the lives that are lost, and let's not make this, you know, about Jews or about Israelis, right? Just came across this passage. So the book of Ezekiel is a prophetic book in the Hebrew Bible, which talks about the end of times, what we call the Messianic era. So this is the ideal time when there's going to be a redeemer, and the Jewish people will be back in their homeland, and the whole world will be blessed, and kind of talking about world peace. So these are kind of messianic texts. So this is a messianic prophecy about the end of times, and the return of the Jewish exiles to the land of Israel. It's prophesying that, right? So this is a book written way back, but it prophesied that the Jews would be dispersed and then brought back to their land, and then there would be an era of peace, right, and so forth. So it's kind of predicting this, and what we have to know is that a lot of the a religious background to the political situation, right? We need to talk a little bit about this. There is a religious background to the political situation on both the Israeli and the Palestinian side. I can't talk too much about the religious background of, the Hamas, what they're trying to do, perhaps their vision of the great caliphate, right, where everything is, the golden age of Islam is restored. There's a little bit of that, but there's also such a vision in the Jewish context, and it's the vision that I think a lot of the right-wing government is kind of inspired by, right? This idea of having a greater Israel with greater borders, which include the West Bank, Gaza, right? The idea of settlers going there. This is not random. This is coming from these visions of the return of the Jews to Israel. And what's interesting is that the vision talks about the borders. And these borders, of course, include West Bank and Gaza, right? So there is, in the right-wing government of Israel, there is this idea that we need to work towards this vision of, messianic vision of, the greater Israel, the rebuilding of the temple, of course, where the Temple Mount is, right? And so it's coming from there. So what's interesting, so I'm reading this prophecy, right? And it's talking about the borders, the rebuilding of the temple. And then there's a very interesting passage, which struck me straight in the face, and which is so relevant to what we're experiencing today. It says this. In the text, it says, and as you rebuild this Israel with the borders and the temple, the stranger you will receive, and you will give them their portion within the land. And now this is fascinating to me, because basically what it's saying is that the ideal vision of God for Israel is not a state full of Jews. It's a state which was supposed to be, yes, full of Jews, but also full of the other, full of the stranger, also containing elements which are not Jewish. And this is the ideal vision of God. It's not a pragmatic vision. is the Messianic ideal vision that the state was never meant to be a Jewish state. In other words, what I started to read in this passage is that the vision of God for the land of Palestine or Israel is a one-state solution where the Jews and the Palestinians are living side by side. That is the Messianic vision, which I believe has been forgotten, right, by the right wing, a worldview in Israel. So they're trying to work towards this greater Israel. They want to rebuild the temple, but actually, the true Messianic vision will only occur when the lion is lying next to the lamb. And I'm not going to say who's the lion, who's the lamb, because according to where you stand, the other is the lion and the other is the lamb, right? So, but this is really, I think, that is really, I think, the ideal, the vision that the text is giving us as we begin to rebuild, right? Of course, the war will eventually end and we will rebuild. How do we rebuild? And I think the biblical ideal is talking about a one-state solution where with a government that is shared and the land that is shared between the two people. Of course, people will tell me, this is idealist, but there are a lot of, there are actually people talking about that it is actually the only way forward that is truly going to make everyone safe. So I just wanted to share that because it really struck me, and it speaks right to the Jewish fundamentalism that is right now in the government and that has created the Palestinian problem, right? The Jewish right wing are saying all of Israel for Jews and the rest, the hell with you, right? So here we're seeing that the true Messianic vision incorporates, includes, embraces the other. And that is what we ought to be working towards, I guess. So that's what I wanted to share because it really struck me and I found it so relevant to today's conflict and time. From the river to the sea. That's
Yeah.
it's exactly those borders, right? Which right now you see the West Bank is coming into Israel, right? Into the state of Israel. That whole area, including the West Bank and of course Gaza. Exactly that area that is being chanted about. This is the area that is described. These are the borders that are described in that prophetic book, but with the specified command within these borders, not only Jews, also the other, which in this case would be the Palestinian, right? So the true Messianic vision, this is why I found it so powerful. It's like the ideal version of the state of Israel is a one-state solution. I found this to be so powerful because yeah, normally we say, by default, we'll admit it. No, this is the ideal, that we ought to live with our other all the time next to them, right? The reconciliation of the lion and the lamb, the reconciliation of enemies, mortal enemies now. After what happened in October 7, it's so difficult. It's so difficult now to imagine ever connecting with this together. And yet the vision is telling us this is the direction. This is the direction towards which we should work. Of course, we're not there yet, and the path is very far, but this is the vision. This is the direction we ought to be working for in order to usher in the Messianic age, right? And it starts with reconciliation, right? And then everything else will fall into place, right? So I guess I thought that was such an amazing passage. Yeah. The Greater Israel, maybe a section of southern, I'm not sure about the southern Lebanon. It wouldn't be taking over the whole Middle East, right? This is not the vision, right? To be taking Jordan and Syria. No, the map is clearly, if you go to the book of Ezekiel, you can see clearly the map, right? And the map, it's mapped out like the ancient state of Israel, which might include a section of southern Lebanon. I'm not sure about that, but for sure it will include the West Bank. It will include Gaza, which is why you see so many settlers going there, right? They are building this Messianic vision and they're trying to take over, right? And they're doing it because they feel inspired by the biblical text. But I believe we have forgotten in our quest to create this Messianic vision or to bring it about, we have forgotten that the key is reconciliation between the self and the other, between the lion and the lamb. And so it's not about replacing, right, or expulsing. It's about, of course, we're all together here and now we live together. How do we live together? And as we learn to live together, this is the Messianic time, right? That is the Messianic time. So Yeah, so the borders, I'm not specific. I know for sure it's from the Jordan to the sea, right? Like the chant works very well here. And I'm pretty sure it includes Gaza also. So for sure, those territories that are meant to be the other state, if you have a two-state solution, are being, as we speak, incorporated. And perhaps even the war in Gaza there is this agenda, right? It's possible, I don't know, right? But for sure, the right-wing government ideal is to have these territories. But what the right-wing government is forgetting is that the true Messianic vision includes a plan for reconciliation and for living with the other within those borders. In other words, those borders are not just for Jews. Those borders were meant to include the other. And in this case, the Palestinian other. They were meant to live together in those borders. God himself is saying, I want you to live together in these borders. It's powerful. I've never seen this. Said everything I wanted to say. I guess I would end by saying perhaps I'm longing for this discussion to continue on QC. I'm so happy that you initiated this discussion where I can talk and express, because the silence has been, it's been hard to repress a lot. And I'm so happy that you're opening this up to Jews, to Muslims. And my hope is that this conversation that we're having online, that it will occur in person on campus, and that we will begin, talking and kind of, sensing the other's plight, and not just asking for them to sense my suffering, but being able to sense their suffering and to reach out. And I really hope that this conversation we're having, right, you're Muslim, I'm Jewish, I would love for this to continue on campus. And if there's any way you can do that, I would be with you all the way. So thank you. Absolutely. So keep me posted what you find. I'm open to doing anything, saying anything, going anywhere.